Welcome back to our Bible series, and this week is very exciting. Next Sunday, we're going to be looking at 2 Maccabees. Now, I know what you're thinking, 2 Maccabees, I'm not too familiar with that book. I think I'll pass on this one. I think I'll skip on this and maybe go to next week. But don't do that. The reason why we're doing these Bible studies is to discover hidden treasure. And we have to go to unfamiliar territory, and 2 Maccabees is a really great place to go. So the first thing you think of when you see 2 Maccabees, you say that this is a continuation of 1 Maccabees. So it picks up where 1 Maccabees left off. And that's true of a lot of the narrative books in the Bible. For instance, Exodus picks up where Genesis left off. And Leviticus picks up where Exodus left off. And you have the book of Judges, and they pick up where Joshua left off. And Maccabees, it seems like you're going to continue with 1 Maccabees. But that's not the case. 2 Maccabees retells the story that was just told in 1 Maccabees. Well, that's really strange. Well, why would anybody do that? Why would anybody rehash the same story? And the reason why is because it wants to take a different perspective. It wants to give new meaning to the story. Everybody has a story, but sometimes they want to have a different take on it. They want to have a different lesson that you can learn from that story. And that is what is happening. So the story that these two books are looking at is a story that when God comes and he rescues Israel from opposition, from oppression, and from persecution. About 164 years before Christ, this Greek leader, Antiochus IV Epiphanes, went in and took over Jerusalem and turned it into a pagan city. Then he took over the temple and turned it and dedicated it to Zeus. And then he told all the Jews, he says, I don't want you to do any more of those Jewish inconsistencies and all of those strange old habits that you used to have. Dietary codes and circumcision and keeping the Sabbath. So he wanted to do away with all of that. And anybody that went back to these traditions would be persecuted. So that's what the story is about, that they're talking about. And God rescues Israel from this oppression, from this persecution. The question is how does God do it? So in 1 Maccabees, it talks about this very, very successful military campaign. And it is all brought about by this family known as the Hasmoneans. And they get a small band of people together to go against and military attack against the enemy. They're completely outnumbered, and yet they're extremely successful, of course, with the help of God. They go in and they retake over Jerusalem, and then they go into the temple and they rededicate the temple back to God. And it's a wonderful story of the impossible odds of this small little military campaign that is brought about. And so that's what the story of 1 Maccabees. 2 Maccabees, the book that we're going to be looking at this Sunday, takes an entirely different take. The second Maccabees, it is not about the military that have become the hero. It's the women and children. And we see that particularly in the reading. It says, it begins by, it happened that 7 brothers and their mother were arrested and tortured with whips and scourges by the king. So they become the heroes. Why? Because they're the faithful ones. Faithful means you're dedicated. Faithful means that you're committed to something really great. And you're so committed that you're willing to suffer, you're willing to be persecuted, and even willing to die for the cause. And for 2 Maccabees, these are the heroes. These are the ones that God uses to bring about the restoration and the glory of Israel. Do you remember the time when the Israelites were taken into captive by the Babylonians? The Babylonians had destroyed Jerusalem. They bring them into captivity, and they're in a concentration camp. And their captives are taunting them. They're saying, oh, look at you guys. Oh, it's you guys worship God, but it seems like God doesn't like you guys anymore. He abandoned you. In fact, so they taunted them. They said, well, let's hear some of your victory songs from the past. And they were teasing them. But then they turned to them and they says, look, we see that you're in a bad situation. Why don't you join us? Why don't you worship our gods? It's obvious that your God has abandoned you. Why don't you join us? Look at what the gods are doing with us. We have a superpower. We have great fields and vegetation. We have lots of riches. Our gods are really good to us, a lot more than your God is to you. So why don't you join us? To understand the situation, imagine that you're in quicksand. and you're about this high in the quicksand, and you're going to go, you're going to die, you're going to go out of existence. And that was the reality of the Israelites. They were about to go out completely out of existence. And the Babylonians reached their hand out and say, here, grab our hand, we'll save you. And you know what the Israelites said? No thanks. No thanks. We will never stop worshiping our God. We'll always be faithful to God. Yeah, God punishes us and we deserve it. But we will always be faithful to God. We will always be generous to God. It's going to be God and nothing. And that was that moment when they were at the worst moment, their darkest hour, and they turned to God. That was the greatest moment of Israeli history. God said, these are my people. I'm not going to leave them. I'm not going to abandon them. And he didn't. And he saved them and he brought them back to Jerusalem. And that's the story of what a commitment does. It's when we are committed, especially in time of suffering and trial, this is our finest moment with God. This is when God really sees us and says, I'm gonna be their God. I'm gonna be their people. Remember Jesus? Jesus was full of opposition. They hated Jesus. And did he turn to war? No. Did he tell his disciples to go after and to destroy the enemy? No, he didn't. He saved them. He suffered and saved everybody. He love your neighbor, love your enemy, pray for your persecutors, turn the other cheek. This was Jesus' way of doing things, and look at the results that we have from Christ himself. The idea here is this in 2 Maccabees: don't kill your enemy, convert them, convert the enemy. And the way you do that is by living God's life, by being faithful to God. And that way, people are going to see the greatness of God when God rescues us. And the nations took note. Nations took note when the Israelites went back to Jerusalem and rebuilt again. All the nations saw how great God was because the Israelites showed them. So when we go to church next Sunday and we hear the reading on 2 Maccabees, we're reminded that this is us, that we're going to turn to God in prayer and say, I want that to be me. I want to be the one that shows the world God's greatness. I want to be the one that in the times of difficulty and hardship, I'm the one that's going to be faithful. And this is what's going to bring about the restoration of the world. So enjoy 2 Maccabees next Sunday. And thank you for joining us in this video. And I hope to see you next week for the next one.